Good evening, everyone. I will be presenting on maternal caffeine intake during pregnancy and risk of obesity in offspring, a prospective cohort study. Here is a screenshot of the original article. Everything on the screenshot will be discussed in upcoming slides, such as background, subjects, methods, results, and conclusions. What made me choose this article is that obesity is a growing epidemic in the United States and in the world. In 2016, 14% to 20% of children were obese. Obesity is determined off of BMI, body mass index, and any BMI over 30 is considered obese. Obesity is linked to costly chronic diseases such as type 2 diabetes, coronary artery disease, cancer, sleep apnea, and hypertension. Obesity is also a risk factor for COVID-19 complications. Those who are overweight and obese are at an increased risk for mortality and intubation from COVID-19. Emerging evidence has revealed that the most critical exposure window for the impact of exogenous factors is in utero, that has long-lasting effects on health outcomes through adverse fetal programming. Caffeine is one chemical that fetuses are widely exposed to. In the United States, more than 75% of pregnant women reported taking caffeinated products. Article objectives. In utero exposures through adverse fetal programming is a contributing factor to the childhood obesity epidemic. The article studied the impact of in utero caffeine exposure on the risk of childhood obesity in offspring. Alright, so the article study population was conducted in the San Francisco, California area. It was examining miscarriage factors of pregnant women from Kaiser Permanente, Northern California hospitals from 1996 to 1998. 1,063 women were recruited in early pregnancy. 829 delivered a live-born infant from those 1,063, and 28 children who did not receive care at KPNC were excluded from the study. The type of study, it is a prospective cohort study, and the study involved pregnant women with a 15-year follow-up. And in the study sample, the mothers varied in age, education, race, income, marital status, pregnancy, BMI, and other factors. They were also asked about the types of drinks, the frequency and amount, and the time they had their first drink. They were also asked if they changed their consumption patterns after becoming pregnant. Caffeine sources were coffee, decaffeinated included, because it has some caffeine in it, tea, soda, energy drinks, and hot chocolate. And here are some further characteristics of the study population by maternal caffeine intake. So the maternal factors they looked at were age at delivery, education, race, income, marital status, pregnancy BMI, pre-existing or gestational diabetes, number of previous live birth. Some index pregnancy factors were maternal smoking during pregnancy, preterm delivery, small for gestational age, child sex, such as male or female, childhood characteristics, were they breastfed, did they eat their vegetables, was screen time limited to an hour per day, did they exercise, and if they played any sports. And for the sample size of the study, they did not mention if they performed the power or sample size calculations. The recruiting strategies, although they did recruit them from the Kaiser Permanente hospitals in the Northern California region, they did not mention how they recruited them. Inclusion criteria, women had to be from the Bay Area and had a positive pregnancy test. Exclusion criteria, dads obviously were not looked at. Women who only drank decaffeinated teas were also exempt, as caffeine content for decaffeinated teas were uncertain. BMI measurements for children under 2 years of age were also excluded because the BMI standard starts at age 2. Randomization was not used, and for control group, they controlled for potential confounders and various caffeine intakes such as none, moderate, and high. And for statistical analysis, logistic regression for repeated measurements was used to obtain point and interval estimates of association after controlling for confounders. Children's age at each BMI measurement was included in all models. Most variables evaluated were not confounders but were included in the final model. Common social-demographic variables such as maternal age, education, and race ethnicity, and the main risk factors for childhood obesity were added. All statistical analyses were performed using our favorite program, SAS. And results. After controlling for confounders, those with in utero caffeine exposure had an 87% increased risk of childhood obesity, odds ratio 1.87. Dose response relationship also showed some significance, odds ratio 1.77 for maternal daily caffeine intake less than 150 milligrams per day, odds ratio 2.37 for caffeine intake greater than 1 or equal to 150 milligrams per day. Dose-response relationship appears stronger for persistent obesity than transitory obesity, and also appeared stronger for girls than it did for boys. Linear relationship was also noted. Every 1 unit increase in maternal caffeine intake was associated with 23% increased risk of obesity to the offspring. Those with high caffeine intake tended to be older, white, and smoked during pregnancy. Source of caffeine did not matter as all caffeinated sources were associated with an increased risk of obesity. There was no appreciable difference in other socio-demographic characteristics and maternal risk factors for childhood obesity. Conclusion. There was an association of in utero caffeine exposure and risk of childhood obesity. The observed dose-response relationship appears to be stronger for those with persistent obesity than transitory obesity. Dose response also affects girls more than boys. I agree with their conclusion as other studies from different countries have concluded the same thing. Norway, for example, which is one of the highest caffeine consuming countries in the world, found similar results in their maternal caffeine intake during pregnancy. They also found the child experiences excess growth in infancy in addition to the caffeine exposure and childhood obesity. Norway used 50,943 mothers in their study. Norway does not have the same obesity rate as the United States, though. Norway's adult obesity rate is 23.1% compared to the United States' 36.2%. Environmental factors may play a part in adult obesity. Eliminating caffeine during pregnancy may prove beneficial in reducing obesity rates. Biases. Given the prospective design, that is maternal caffeine intake in pregnancy as the exposure and obesity in offspring as the outcome, the potential for some common biases, for example selection and recall biases, was likely reduced. Couldn't control all confounders as 1/3 of pregnant women put sugar in their coffee. The women were only exclusive to the Bay Area, San Francisco. Other studies can look at rural communities, impoverished communities with food deserts, and communities that have a high caffeine intake or low caffeine intake. The information on height and weight was recorded by medical professionals rather than self-report in order to avoid recall bias and improve accuracy of measurements. The large study population reduced unstable estimates usually caused by small sample sizes. Gender differences can be considered for future studies, and other hospitals could also be observed for future studies. And here is a list of the references that I used. Thank you for listening and watching.